Support the author of today's story by checking out their other works. If you enjoy unsettling tales that linger in your mind long after the last word, you'll find more to haunt you. But for now, let's step into a place that's both nowhere and everywhere, a town you've never heard of, but one you'll never forget. Or maybe you already have. Let's begin. I first heard about the town from a man on a train. He was old, with a face like a crumpled map, and he spoke in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere far away, as if he were remembering a dream he'd had as a child. He told me about a place where the streets were always clean, the houses always neat, and the people always smiling. But there was something wrong, he said. Something missing. He couldn't remember what it was, only that it was important. He said he'd lived there once, or maybe just passed through. He wasn't sure. He couldn't remember that I laughed it off at the time, chalking it up to the ramblings of a lonely old man. But the story stuck with me, like a splinter in my mind. I found myself thinking about it at odd moments, while brushing my teeth, waiting for the kettle to boil, staring out the window at the rain. The idea of a town where everyone lost their memories was both terrifying and strangely comforting. What would it be like, I wondered, to live without the weight of the past? To wake up every day as a blank slate, unburdened by regret or sorrow. It was a few weeks later that I found myself driving through the countryside, the radio crackling with static, the sky a dull, unremarkable gray. I wasn't going anywhere in particular, just driving, trying to outrun a feeling I couldn't name. That's when I saw the sign. It was old and faded, the paint peeling, the letters barely legible. Welcome to Gilead. Population? The question marks were what caught my eye. I slowed down, curiosity getting the better of me, and turned onto the narrow road that led into the town. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence you find in the woods or by a lake, but a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed in on you from all sides. The houses were neat, just as the old man had said, with tidy lawns and white picket fences. But there were no cars in the driveways, no children playing in the yards, no dogs barking or birds singing. It was as if the town had been abandoned in a hurry, but everything was still in its place that I parked my car on the side of the road and got out, the door slamming shut with a sound that seemed to echo for miles. I walked down the main street, my footsteps loud in the stillness. The shops were all closed, the windows dark. I peered inside one, a bakery, judging by the faded sign above the door. The shelves were empty, but there was a faint smell of bread in the air, as if someone had just taken a loaf out of the oven. I kept walking, drawn by a sense of unease and curiosity. I passed a school, its playground empty, the swings creaking in the wind. A church, its doors locked, a sign out front that read, Sunday service, remember. The word sent a chill down my spine. It was then that I saw the first person. She was standing in front of a house, staring at the door as if she couldn't remember how to open it. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair and a pale, anxious face. I hesitated, unsure whether to approach her, but she turned and saw me. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she took a step back. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound friendly. "Are you all right?" She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to place me. Then she shook her head. I don't know," she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "I can't remember." "Can't remember what?" I asked. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together nervously. "Anything. I woke up this morning and I don't know who I am. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach." "Do you live here?" She shook her head again. "I don't know. I don't know anything." I tried to reassure her, telling her that maybe she'd had some kind of accident, that her memory would come back. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. There was something about the way she looked at me, lost, desperate, as if she were clinging to the edge of a cliff, and I was the only thing keeping her from falling. That we stood there in silence for a moment. the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. Then she spoke again. "Are you from here?" "No," I said. "I was just passing through." She nodded, as if that explained everything. "Maybe you should leave," she said quietly, "before it happens to you." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she turned away, walking down the street with slow, uncertain steps. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of fear and pity. I thought about getting back in my car and driving away, but something kept me there, a sense of unfinished business, of a mystery that needed to be solved. That I wandered through the town, looking for someone else to talk to. I saw a man sitting on a bench in the park, staring at the ground. He looked up as I approached, his eyes blank and unfocused. "Excuse me," I said. "Can you tell me where I am?" He frowned, as if the question confused him. I don't know," he said. "I was hoping you could tell me." I sat down beside him, and we talked for a while, though it was less a conversation and more a series of questions neither of us could answer. He didn't know his name, or where he was from, or how he'd gotten there. He didn't know what day it was, or what year. He didn't even know how old he was. As we talked, I noticed other people drifting through the park, men and women, young and old, all with the same lost, bewildered look. Some of them wandered in circles, others sat on the grass and stared into space. A few tried to talk to each other, but the conversations always ended the same way, with shrugs and blank stares. It was as if the entire town had been struck by a wave of amnesia, wiping away everything that made them who they were. I wondered if it was some kind of gas leak, or a virus, or a government experiment gone wrong. But there was no sign of panic, no sense of urgency, just a quiet, resigned confusion that I decided to explore further, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened. I walked down side streets, peered into windows, tried doors. Most of the houses were unlocked, and inside they were neat and tidy, but strangely impersonal. There were no family photos on the walls, no personal belongings, no signs of life. It was as if the people who lived there had never really lived at all. In one house, I found a diary on the kitchen table. The cover was blank, and inside the pages were filled with neat, careful handwriting. But every entry was the same. "I don't remember. I don't remember. I don't remember." Page after page, the words repeated like a mantra, growing more frantic and desperate as the days went on. I took the diary with me, feeling a sense of dread settle over me. I began to notice other things, strange things. The clocks in every house were stopped at the same time, 3:33. The calendars were all turned to the same date, March 3rd. The televisions and radios were dead, the phones didn't work. It was as if time itself had stopped in Gilead. As the sun began to set, the town took on a different quality. The shadows grew longer, the silence deeper. I felt a growing sense of unease, as if I were being watched. I decided to find a place to spend the night, hoping that things would make more sense in the morning. I chose a small motel on the edge of town. The lobby was empty, the desk covered in a thin layer of dust. I found a key hanging on a hook and let myself into one of the rooms. It was clean and comfortable, but there was something off about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly safe, truly at home. But the harder I tried, the more the memories slipped away, like water through my fingers. That I must have drifted off, because I woke with a start to the sound of someone knocking on the door. I sat up, heart pounding, and called out, "Who is it?" There was no answer, just another knock, louder this time. I got up and opened the door, half expecting to see the woman from earlier or the man from the park. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. That I stepped outside, looking up and down the corridor. At the far end, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a child, a little girl in a white dress, her hair hanging in tangled curls around her face. She was staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the silence. She didn't answer, just turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I hesitated, then followed her, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. I turned the corner, but she was gone. I searched the motel, but found no sign of her. I returned to my room, feeling more unsettled than ever. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in Gilead. I lay awake for hours, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I drifted off again, my dreams filled with images of empty streets, blank faces, and the little girl in the white dress. When I woke the next morning, the sun was shining, the sky a clear, brilliant blue. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that everything was normal, that the events of the previous day had been a bad dream. But as soon as I stepped outside, I knew that nothing had changed. The town was still silent, the people still lost. I saw the woman from the day before, sitting on a bench, staring at her hands. I saw the man from the park, wandering aimlessly down the street. I saw the little girl in the white dress, standing in the doorway of a house, watching me with those wide, unblinking eyes that I decided to try and talk to her, to see if she knew anything about what was happening. I walked over, but as I approached, she turned and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. I knocked, but there was no answer. I stood there for a moment, feeling helpless. Then I noticed something strange, a symbol carved into the door, a circle with a line through it. I'd seen the same symbol before, on the sign outside the church, on the diary I'd found, even on the clock faces in the houses. It seemed to be everywhere, a silent reminder of something I couldn't quite remember. That I decided to visit the church, hoping to find some answers. The doors were still locked, but I found a window that was slightly ajar and managed to climb inside. The interior was dark and cold, the air thick with dust. I made my way to the altar, where I found another diary, this one older and more worn than the first. I opened it, and the first entry caught my eye. "We must not forget. We must remember who we are, where we came from. But it's getting harder every day. The memories slip away, replaced by emptiness. I fear that soon there will be nothing left." I read through the entries, each one more desperate than the last. The writer spoke of a darkness that had fallen over the town, a fog that stole memories and left only confusion. They wrote of people forgetting their own names, their families, their lives. They wrote of the symbol, saying it was a ward against the forgetting, a way to hold on to what little they had left. But in the end, the entries stopped, the handwriting growing shaky and illegible. The last words were barely readable. "I can't remember. I can't remember. I can't." I closed the diary and sat in the pew, the silence of the church pressing in on me. The air felt thick, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to piece together what I'd learned, but the facts slipped away from me, elusive as dreams. The people here had lost their memories, that much was clear. But why? And how? Was it something in the air, the water, the soil? Or was it something older, something deeper, a curse or a punishment for some forgotten sin? I left the church and wandered the streets, searching for answers. The town seemed even emptier than before, the silence more profound. I saw a few people, but they moved like sleepwalkers, their faces blank, their eyes unfocused. I tried to talk to them, but they only stared at me as if I were a ghost. I found myself drawn back to the park, where the man from the day before still sat on the bench, staring at the ground. I sat beside him, and for a long time, we said nothing. Finally, he spoke. "Do you ever feel like you're forgetting something important?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "All the time," I replied. He nodded, as if that made sense. I keep thinking that if I just sit here long enough, I'll remember. But the longer I sit, the less I know. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be all right, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. I didn't know if anything would ever be all right again. As I sat there, I noticed the little girl in the white dress standing at the edge of the park, watching us. She seemed to be everywhere, always just out of reach, always watching. I wondered if she was real or just a figment of my imagination. That I stood up and walked toward her, but she turned and ran, disappearing between two houses. I followed, determined to catch her, to ask her what she knew. I chased her through backyards and alleys, past empty houses and overgrown gardens, until I found myself at the edge of town. There, at the end of a narrow lane, stood an old, crumbling house. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling, the roof sagging. The little girl stood in front of the door, her hand resting on the doorknob. She looked at me, her eyes wide and solemn. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer, just opened the door and slipped inside. I hesitated, then followed her, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The interior of the house was dark and cold, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. I could hear the girl's footsteps ahead of me, light and quick. I followed her up a narrow staircase, down a long hallway, and into a small room at the end. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center, facing the window. The girl stood beside the chair, her hands clasped in front of her. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You have to remember," she said, her voice barely audible. "Remember what?" She shook her head. "Everything." I sat in the chair, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. The view from the window was familiar, though I couldn't say why. I closed my eyes and tried to remember, but my thoughts were a jumble, fragments of memories that didn't quite fit together. I saw flashes of faces, places, moments, my mother's smile, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of laughter in the dark. But they slipped away as quickly as they came, leaving only a sense of loss. When I opened my eyes, the girl was gone. I stood up and looked around the room, searching for some clue, some sign. On the wall, scratched into the plaster, was the same symbol I'd seen before, a circle with a line through it that I traced the symbol with my finger, feeling a strange tingling in my hand. For a moment, I thought I remembered something, a voice, a name, a promise. But it faded before I could grasp it. I left the house and wandered back into town, feeling more lost than ever. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with red and gold. The streets were empty, the silence absolute. I found myself at the edge of a small lake, the water still and dark. I sat on the shore, watching the reflections of the clouds drift across the surface. I tried to remember who I was, where I'd come from. But the harder I tried, the more the memories slipped away. As darkness fell, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see the woman from before, the one who couldn't remember her name. She sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the water. "Do you ever feel like you're not real?" she asked. I nodded. "All the time." She smiled, a sad, distant smile. "I think I used to have a family. A husband, maybe. Children. But I can't remember their faces. I can't remember anything." We sat in silence, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. "Do you think we'll ever remember?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "But I hope so." She nodded, and we sat together until the stars came out, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. That night, I dreamed of the little girl in the white dress. She stood at the edge of the lake, her reflection shimmering in the water. She reached out to me, her hand cold and small in mine. "You have to remember," she whispered, "before it's too late." I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the silence oppressive. I lay there, trying to hold on to the dream, but it slipped away, leaving only a sense of urgency. I got up and dressed, determined to find answers. I wandered the town, searching for the girl, for the symbol, for anything that might help me remember. I found myself at the library, a small brick building at the center of town. The door was unlocked, the interior dim and dusty. Rows of books lined the shelves, their spines faded and worn. I searched the shelves, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Most of the books were blank, their pages empty. But in the back, I found a single volume with writing inside. The book was a journal, filled with careful, precise handwriting. The entries were dated, each one describing the slow unraveling of memory in the town. The writer spoke of people forgetting their names, their families, their lives. They wrote of the symbol, saying it was a way to hold on to what little they had left. But as the entries went on, the handwriting grew more frantic, the words more desperate. The writer spoke of a darkness that crept into their mind, erasing everything. They wrote of the little girl in the white dress, saying she was the key, the only one who remembered. The last entry was a scrawl, barely legible. If you're reading this, it's not too late. Find a girl. Remember. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I knew what I had to do. I left the library and searched the town, calling out for the girl. I checked every house, every street, every alley, but she was nowhere to be found. As dawn broke, I found myself back at the old, crumbling house at the edge of town. The door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The house was empty, the air thick with dust and silence. I climbed the stairs, walked down the hallway, and entered the small room at the end. The chair was still there, facing the window. I sat down, closed my eyes, and tried to remember. At first, there was nothing, just darkness and silence. But then, slowly, memories began to surface. I saw flashes of my childhood, my parents, my friends. I remembered laughter, tears, love, loss. I remembered the feeling of being alive, but then the memories began to fade, slipping away like smoke. I tried to hold on, but they were gone, leaving only emptiness. I opened my eyes and saw the little girl standing in front of me. She looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. "You have to remember," she said. "It's the only way." "I'm trying," I whispered, "but it's so hard." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Close your eyes," she said. "Listen." I closed my eyes and listened. At first, I heard nothing. But then, faintly, I heard voices, whispers, laughter, the sound of footsteps on gravel. I heard the wind in the trees, the distant tolling of a bell, the soft murmur of water. The sounds grew louder, clearer, until they filled my mind. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of connection, of belonging. When I opened my eyes, the girl was gone. But I felt different, lighter, somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders that I left the house and walked back into town. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the empty streets. I saw people moving about, their faces still blank, but there was a sense of purpose in their movements, as if they were searching for something. I joined them, walking through the town, looking for answers. I saw the woman from the lake, the man from the park, the others I'd met. We nodded to each other, a silent acknowledgement of our shared confusion. As the day wore on, I began to notice changes. The people seemed more animated, their eyes brighter. They talked to each other, shared stories, laughed. It was as if the act of searching, of trying to remember, was bringing them back to life. I found myself at the church again, the doors now open. Inside, people sat in the pews, talking quietly. The air was filled with a sense of hope, fragile but real. I sat among them, listening to their stories. Some remembered fragments, a name, a face, a song. Others remembered nothing, but they kept trying, kept searching. As the sun set, I walked to the edge of town and looked back. The houses glowed in the fading light, the streets alive with movement. The silence was gone, replaced by the sounds of life. I realized then that memory was not just about the past. It was about connection, about the stories we share, the bonds we form. Even in a town where everyone had lost their memories, the act of searching, of reaching out to each other, was enough to keep hope alive. I turned and walked away, the town fading behind me. I didn't know if I would ever remember who I was, but I knew that I was not alone. And that, I realized, was enough. I left Gilead behind me, or at least I thought I did. The road out of town was long and winding, bordered by fields that seemed to stretch on forever, their golden grasses swaying in the morning breeze. I drove in silence, the radio still nothing but static, my mind replaying the faces and voices I'd encountered. I tried to hold on to the details, to fix them in my memory, but already they were slipping away, dissolving into a haze of impressions and half-remembered conversations. After an hour, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the town receding in the distance. But there was nothing behind me, no sign of houses, no welcome sign, not even the faintest trace of a road. It was as if Gilead had never existed, or as if I'd imagined the whole thing. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out, breathing in the crisp morning air. The world felt different, emptier, somehow, as if something essential had been stripped away. I tried to remember the name of the woman by the lake, the man on the park bench, the little girl in the white dress. Their faces floated before me, blurred and indistinct, like figures seen through frosted glass that I closed my eyes and tried to focus, to anchor myself in the present. I remembered the symbol, the circle with the line through it. I traced it in the dust on the hood of my car, hoping it would help me hold on to what I'd seen, what I'd felt. For a moment, I thought I heard a voice, faint and distant, calling my name. But when I opened my eyes, I was alone. I got back in the car and drove on, the road stretching out before me like a ribbon of possibility. I passed through other towns, other places, but none of them felt real. The people I met were polite but distant, their eyes sliding past me as if I were invisible. I tried to ask them about Gilead, about memory, about the little girl in the white dress, but they only shook their heads, their faces blank. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time lost its meaning, each day blending into the next. I kept moving, searching for something I couldn't name. I stayed in motels, ate in diners, wandered through empty streets. Everywhere I went, I looked for the symbol, for any sign that someone else remembered. But there was nothing, just the endless, unchanging landscape, the same faces, the same questions. One night, I found myself in a small town much like Gilead. The streets were quiet, the houses neat and tidy. I checked into a motel and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I felt a sense of déjà vu, as if I'd been there before, though I knew I hadn't. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind was restless, filled with images of empty streets and blank faces. I dreamed of the little girl again. She stood at the edge of a forest, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. She beckoned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. "You have to remember," she whispered. "You have to help them." I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the silence oppressive. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the dream. But the feeling lingered, a sense of urgency, of unfinished business. I got dressed and left the motel, walking through the empty streets. The town was silent, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath my feet. I wandered aimlessly, drawn by a feeling I couldn't explain. I found myself at the edge of the forest, the trees looming dark and silent. I hesitated, then stepped into the shadows, the branches closing in around me. The air was cool and damp, the ground soft beneath my feet. I walked for what felt like hours, the darkness pressing in on all sides. At last, I came to a clearing. In the center stood a circle of stones, ancient and weathered, their surfaces covered in moss and lichen. In the center of the circle stood the little girl, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "You found me," she said. That I nodded, unable to speak. She knelt and traced the symbol in the dirt, the circle with the line through it. "This is the key," she said. "It's what keeps the forgetting at bay. But it's not enough. You have to remember. You have to help them remember." I knelt beside her, my hands shaking. "How?" I whispered. "How do I remember?" She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears. "You have to let go," she said. "You have to stop running from your past. Only then can you help the others." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, letting the memories come. At first, there was only darkness, a void where my past should have been. But then, slowly, images began to surface, my childhood home, my parents' faces, the sound of laughter, the sting of loss. I remembered the pain, the joy, the love, the regret. I remembered who I was. When I opened my eyes, the girl was gone. The clearing was empty, the stones silent witnesses to my awakening. I stood and looked around, feeling a sense of clarity, of purpose. I knew what I had to do. I left the forest and returned to the town. The streets were still empty, the houses still silent. But I felt different, stronger, more alive. I knocked on doors, spoke to the people I met, told them my story. At first, they looked at me with suspicion, their eyes wary. But as I spoke, something changed. Their faces softened, their eyes brightened. They began to remember, fragments at first, then whole memories, flooding back in a rush. Word spread, and soon others joined me. We gathered in the town square, sharing our stories, our memories. Some wept, others laughed. All of us united by the act of remembering. The silence that had hung over the town was broken, replaced by the sound of voices, of life. As the sun rose, I looked around at the faces of the people I'd helped. They were no longer strangers, no longer lost. They were themselves again, whole and alive. I realized then that memory was not just about the past. It was about connection, about the stories we share, the bonds we form. Even in a town where everyone had lost their memories, the act of searching, of reaching out to each other, was enough to keep hope alive. I stayed in the town for a while, helping others remember, sharing my story. Each day, more people joined us, drawn by the promise of connection, of belonging. The town came alive, the silence banished by the sound of laughter and conversation. But I knew I couldn't stay forever. There were other towns, other people who needed help. I packed my things and said my goodbyes, promising to return someday. As I drove away, I looked back at the town, now vibrant and alive. I felt a sense of peace, of fulfillment. I knew that I had made a difference, that I had helped others find themselves. But as the miles passed, I felt a familiar sense of unease. The road stretched out before me, endless and unchanging. The faces and names I'd come to know began to fade, slipping away like dreams upon waking. That I tried to hold on, to remember. But the harder I tried, the more the memories slipped away. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the town was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of fields and sky. That I pulled over and sat by the side of the road, tracing the symbol in the dust. I closed my eyes and tried to remember, but all I could see was the little girl in the white dress, her eyes filled with sadness. "You have to remember," she whispered. "You have to help them." I opened my eyes and looked around, the world empty and silent. I realized then that the forgetting was not just a curse, it was a part of me, a shadow I could never escape. But I also knew that I was not alone. There were others out there, searching, hoping, remembering. And as long as we kept trying, kept reaching out to each other, there was hope. I got back in the car and drove on, the road stretching out before me, endless and full of possibility. The days that followed blurred together, a tapestry of highways, small towns, and fleeting encounters. I became a wanderer, a collector of stories, a seeker of lost memories. Each place I visited seemed to echo with the same quiet ache I'd felt in Gilead, a sense that something vital had slipped away, leaving only shadows behind. In one town, I met an old woman who sat on her porch every evening, knitting scarves she never finished. She greeted me with a gentle smile, her eyes bright but distant. When I asked her about her family, she hesitated, her needles pausing mid-stitch. "I know I had a daughter," she said, her voice trembling. "She had hair the color of autumn leaves. Or was it spring grass? I can't remember, but I know I loved her. I know I still do." I sat with her as the sun dipped below the horizon, listening to her stories, fragments, really, half-remembered moments and feelings. She spoke of laughter in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon, the sound of a lullaby hummed in the dark. Each memory was a thread, delicate and frayed, but together they formed a tapestry of longing and love. Before I left, she pressed a half-finished scarf into my hands. "For the road," she said. "Maybe it will help you remember where you're going." I thanked her and continued on my way, the scarf warm in my lap, a tangible reminder that even the faintest memories could be cherished. In another town, I found a group of children playing in a dusty lot, their laughter ringing out like bells. They chased each other in circles, their faces flushed with joy. I watched them for a while, envying their freedom, their innocence. One of the children, a boy with a gap-toothed grin, ran up to me, holding out a battered baseball glove. "Want to play?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded, letting him pull me into their game. For a while, I forgot about the weight of memory, the ache of loss. I was just another player, running and laughing, caught up in the moment. After the game, the boy sat beside me, his legs swinging over the curb. "My mom says I used to have a brother," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But I don't remember him. Sometimes I think I see him in my dreams, though. Do you think that means he's real?" I looked at him, searching for the right words. "I think the people we love never really leave us," I said. "Even if we forget their faces, their names, they're still a part of us. Maybe your brother is with you in ways you can't see." He nodded, satisfied, and ran off to join his friends. I watched him go, feeling a bittersweet ache in my chest. As I traveled, I began to notice patterns, symbols carved into doorways, drawn in chalk on sidewalks, etched into the bark of trees. The circle with the line through it, always the same, always present. It was as if the world itself was trying to remind me, to anchor me in the present. One evening, as I drove through a rainstorm, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. It was the little girl in the white dress, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. I pulled over and got out, the rain soaking through my clothes in seconds. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and solemn. "You're still searching," she said. I nodded, unable to speak. She reached out and took my hand, her grip cold and strong. "You can't run from your memories forever," she said. "You have to face them. Only then can you help others do the same." I knelt beside her, the rain pounding on my back. "I'm afraid," I whispered. "What if I remember something I can't bear?" She squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." With that, she let go and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me kneeling in the mud, my heart pounding. I got back in the car and drove on, the wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the glass. I thought about the people I'd met, the stories I'd heard. Each one was a piece of a puzzle, a fragment of a larger truth. That night, I stopped at a roadside diner, its neon sign flickering in the rain. Inside, The air was warm and filled with the smell of coffee and frying onions. I sat at the counter, nursing a mug of coffee, watching the other patrons. A man sat beside me, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug. He glanced at me, his eyes tired but kind. "You look like you've been on the road a long time," he said. I nodded. "Feels like forever." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Sometimes it takes a long journey to find your way home." We talked for a while, sharing stories of places we'd been, people we'd met. He told me about a town where the people forgot everything, where memories slipped away like water through a sieve. "I was there once," he said. "Or maybe I just dreamed it. Hard to tell the difference these days." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "Did you ever find out why it happened?" He shook his head. "Some things can't be explained. Sometimes all you can do is keep moving, keep searching." Before he left, he pressed a small, smooth stone into my hand. The symbol was carved into its surface, worn smooth by years of handling. "Keep this," he said. "It'll help you remember what's important." I thanked him and watched as he disappeared into the night. The bell above the door jingling softly. I turned the stone over in my hand, feeling its weight, its warmth. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my family, my friends, the places I'd called home. The memories came in flashes, bright and sharp, then faded into darkness. I realized then that memory was not a straight line, but a circle, a loop that brought us back to where we started, changed but still ourselves. I left the diner and drove on, the stone in my pocket, the scarf around my neck. Each object was a talisman, a reminder of the people I'd met, the lives I'd touched. As dawn broke, I found myself at the edge of a vast field, the grass silver with dew. I parked the car and walked into the field, the earth soft beneath my feet. In the center of the field stood a single tree, its branches reaching toward the sky. Carved into its trunk was the symbol, deep and clear. I sat beneath the tree, the sun warming my face. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind in the grass, the distant call of a bird, the steady beat of my own heart. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I realized that I didn't need to remember everything, that it was enough to be present, to be alive, to share my story with others. I opened my eyes and looked around, the world bright and new. I knew that the journey was not over, that there would be more towns, more people, more stories. But I was no longer afraid. I stood and walked back to the car, the sun rising behind me, the road stretching out before me. As I drove, I thought about the little girl in the white dress, about the people I'd met, the memories I'd shared. I knew that I would never forget them, not really. They were a part of me now, woven into the fabric of my being. And as long as I kept moving, kept searching, kept reaching out to others, I knew that I would never truly be lost. You have to face them. Only then can you help others do the same. I knelt beside her, the rain pounding on my back. "I'm afraid," I whispered. "What if I remember something I can't bear?" She squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." With that, she let go and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me kneeling in the mud, my heart pounding. I got back in the car and drove on, the wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the glass. I thought about the people I'd met, the stories I'd heard. Each one was a piece of a puzzle, a fragment of a larger truth. That night, I stopped at a roadside diner, its neon sign flickering in the rain. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the smell of coffee and frying onions. I sat at the counter, nursing a mug of coffee, watching the other patrons. A man sat beside me, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug. He glanced at me, his eyes tired but kind. "You look like you've been on the road a long time," he said. I nodded. "Feels like forever." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Sometimes it takes a long journey to find your way home." We talked for a while, sharing stories of places we'd been, people we'd met. He told me about a town where the people forgot everything, where memories slipped away like water through a sieve. I was there once, he said. Or maybe I just dreamed it. Hard to tell the difference these days. I looked at him, my heart pounding. Did you ever find out why it happened? He shook his head. Some things can't be explained. Sometimes all you can do is keep moving, keep searching. Before he left, he pressed a small, smooth stone into my hand. The symbol was carved into its surface, worn smooth by years of handling. Keep this, he said. It'll help you remember what's important. I thanked him and watched as he disappeared into the night. The bell above the door jingling softly as I turned the stone over in my hand, feeling its weight, its warmth. The road ahead was endless, but for the first time, I didn't dread it. I drove with the window down, letting the wind tangle my hair and the morning sun warm my face. The stone with the symbol rested in my palm, grounding me, reminding me that every journey, no matter how winding, was a thread in the tapestry of memory that I passed through towns that felt both familiar and strange. In each, I found echoes of Gilead, a mural of faceless figures on a school wall, a song hummed by a woman sweeping her porch, a child's chalk drawing of a circle with a line through it on the sidewalk. Sometimes I stopped and spoke to people, asking if they remembered the symbol, if they'd ever felt the world slip away beneath their feet. Most shook their heads, but a few paused, their eyes clouding with something like recognition. In one town, I met a young man named Eli who ran a secondhand bookstore. The shop was cluttered and cozy, the air thick with the scent of old paper and coffee. I browsed the shelves, running my fingers over the spines, searching for something I couldn't name. Eli watched me from behind the counter, his gaze curious but kind. Looking for anything in particular? He asked that I hesitated, then showed him the stone. Have you ever seen this symbol before? He took the stone, turning it over in his hands. Yeah, he said softly. My grandmother used to draw it on the door every spring. She said it kept the bad dreams away. Did it work? I asked. He smiled, a little sadly. I don't know. She forgot a lot, near the end. But she always remembered to draw the symbol. I nodded, feeling a kinship with this stranger. Do you ever feel like you're forgetting something important? All the time, he replied. But I think that's just part of being human. We lose things, but we find new ones, too. I bought a battered notebook from him, its pages yellowed and soft. For your memories, Eli said as he handed it to me. Write them down before they slip away. I thanked him and left, the notebook tucked under my arm. That night, in a quiet motel room, I began to write. I wrote about Gilead, about the people I'd met, about the little girl in the white dress. I wrote about the old woman and her unfinished scarf, the boy who dreamed of a brother, the man in the diner with the stone. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes blurred, pouring my memories onto the page, anchoring them in ink and paper. As I wrote, I felt the weight of forgetting lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. I realized that memory was not just about holding on. It was about sharing, about passing stories from one person to another, weaving a web of connection that could withstand even the darkest night. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. I lay in bed, listening to the steady rhythm, feeling a quiet contentment. I reached for the notebook and read over what I'd written, the words grounding me, reminding me of who I was and where I'd been. I packed my things and set out again, the rain easing as I drove. The world felt fresh and new, washed clean by the storm. I stopped at a roadside cafe for breakfast, the air inside warm and filled with the scent of coffee and cinnamon rolls. A woman sat at the next table, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp and kind. She glanced at my notebook and smiled. Are you a writer? I shrugged. I guess I am now. I'm just trying to remember. She nodded, her smile tinged with understanding. Sometimes, writing is the only way to hold on to what matters. We talked for a while, sharing stories over coffee. She told me about her childhood, about the songs her mother used to sing, about the way the world seemed brighter when she was young. She spoke of loss, of love, of the ache of forgetting. Before I left, she pressed a slip of paper into my hand. On it was a poem, written in careful, looping script. Asterisk, when memory fades and shadows fall. Hold tight to the stories, recall them all. For in the telling, we find our way. And keep the darkness at bay. Asterisk. I thanked her and tucked the poem into my notebook, another thread in the tapestry. As I continued my journey, I found myself drawn to places where people gathered, libraries, parks, churches, community centers. I listened to their stories, shared my own, and watched as the act of remembering brought light to their eyes. Sometimes I saw the symbol carved into a bench, drawn in the dust, traced in the condensation on a window. Each time, it felt like a sign, a reminder that I was not alone. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, I found myself at the edge of a small town nestled in the hills. The streets were quiet, the houses bathed in the soft glow of porch lights. I parked my car and walked through the town, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. In the town square, a group of people had gathered around a fire pit, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They welcomed me with smiles and open arms, inviting me to join them. I sat by the fire, listening as they shared stories, some funny, some sad, all woven with the threads of memory. As the night deepened, a hush fell over the group. An elderly man stood and began to speak, his voice steady and strong. "We are the sum of our memories," he said. "But we are also more. We are the stories we share, the love we give, the hope we carry. Even when we forget, even when the past slips away, we are still ourselves. We are still here." The group sat in silence, the fire crackling, the stars wheeling overhead. I felt a sense of belonging, a sense that I had found what I'd been searching for. Later, as the fire died down and people drifted away, I sat alone, staring into the embers. I thought of the little girl in the white dress, of Gilead, of all the places and people I'd encountered. I realized that the journey was not about finding a place or a person or even a memory. It was about finding myself, about accepting the ebb and flow of remembering and forgetting. I opened my notebook and wrote one final entry. Asterisk, I am the sum of my memories, but I am also the stories I share, the love I give, the hope I carry. Even when I forget, I am still myself. I am still here. Asterisk, as I closed the notebook, I felt a sense of peace, a sense that I had come full circle. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I knew that, whatever happened, I would keep moving, keep searching, keep reaching out to others. And as long as I did, I would never truly be lost. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the world outside my window still wrapped in a gentle blue haze. I sat up, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of the journey behind me and the promise of the road ahead. The notebook lay on the bedside table, the stone with the symbol beside it, both silent witnesses to the story I was still living. I packed my things and stepped outside, the air cool and fresh, the sky streaked with the first hints of sunrise. The town was still asleep, the streets empty, the only sound the distant call of a bird greeting the day. I walked to the edge of the square, pausing for a moment to look back at the place that had welcomed me, that had reminded me of the power of stories, of memory, of connection. As I stood there, I saw a figure at the far end of the street, a small girl in a white dress, her hair shining in the early light. She watched me, her eyes calm and knowing, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. I walked toward her, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. When I reached her, she smiled, a gentle, bittersweet smile that seemed to hold all the sorrow and hope of the world. "You remembered," she said softly. I nodded, unable to find my voice. She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and real. "You helped them remember, too. That's all any of us can do." We stood together in the growing light, the silence between us filled with understanding. I thought of all the people I'd met, all the stories I'd heard, all the memories I'd gathered and shared. I realized that the forgetting would always be there, a shadow at the edge of things, but it didn't have to win. As long as we reached out to each other, as long as we told our stories, as long as we remembered, even for a moment, we could keep the darkness at bay. The girl let go of my hand and stepped back, her eyes shining. "It's time for you to go," she said. "There are more stories to find, more people to help, but you'll never be alone." "Not really." I watched as she turned and walked away, her white dress glowing in the morning sun. I stood there for a long time, watching the light spill over the rooftops, feeling the warmth on my face. When I finally turned to leave, I felt lighter, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been set down. I walked back to my car, the stone in my pocket, the notebook under my arm, the poem tucked safely inside. I started the engine and pulled onto the road, the tires humming a steady rhythm, the world opening up before me. As I drove, I thought about the journey, the towns and faces, the laughter and tears, the moments of fear and hope. I thought about the old woman and her scarf, the boy and his dreams, the man in the diner, the firelit stories in the square. I thought about Gilead, about the silence and the forgetting, about the way memory could slip away and return, changed but still precious. That I realized that the story was not just mine. It belonged to everyone I'd met, everyone who had ever struggled to remember, to hold on, to find their way back to themselves. It was a story of loss and longing, but also of resilience, of kindness, of the quiet courage it took to keep searching, to keep hoping, to keep loving even when the past was lost. The sun rose higher, painting the world in gold. I rolled down the window and let the wind carry away the last traces of fear, of doubt, of sorrow. I was not the same person who had first heard the story of the town where everyone lost their memories. I was more, fuller, richer, woven through with the lives and stories of others. And as the miles slipped by, I knew that I would keep moving, keep listening, keep remembering. Because in the end, that was all any of us could do, to hold on to the light, to share it with others, to keep the darkness at bay, one story at a time.